Hi, welcome to AtlasCamp. I'm Ben Speakman. AtlasCamp 2011, the Fall Classic. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about AUI today. AUI is cool. You should use it. I'm going to tell you how. I'm going to tell you why. Here's a few things we're going to go over. The basics of AUI, what it does, how it can help you. We're going to talk about a few AUI components, things that are important about the components, what they're good for, when you should use them, when you should not. We'll go over a couple of uses of the real world AUI components, how you can actually use them to do things that you want them to do. We'll show how you can transform a plugin that you've already written with AUI with a minimum of effort to get a maximum of response, and we'll quickly wrap up after that. So who am I? My name is Ben Speakman. I think I said that already, but it bears saying again. I work in San Francisco. I'm on the developer relations team. Jonathan Doppelbeck, who gave a presentation a short moments ago. Jonathan Olin is my tech lead. And we have Sam out in France plugging on active objects and the plugin analyzer, the latter of which you'll hear more about shortly. I've been at Atlassian for 3.5 years, and although I've done a lot of Java at Atlassian, the past few months it's been pretty heavy on AUI. And I've learned a lot, some of it good. I'm going to share the good parts today. So let's see what we're dealing with. AUI is the Atlassian Interface Library. This means that it contains JavaScript and CSS. These technologies are what the web is built on. In this case, they're how Atlassian achieves proper styling, consistent styling, and useful styling inside our products and inside our plugins. AUI is not just a plugins library, it's for everything. This is the really cool part about it. It works in all your browsers. It bundles jQuery for you. It is all singing, all dancing, and it's very cool. It does a lot of things. One thing that's important about AUI that we've committed to that we don't normally commit to with regular plugins is that AUI is going to be forward compatible as well as backward compatible. And what I mean by that is this. AUI is descriptive, not proscriptive. What I mean is AUI says in your code what something is supposed to do and how it should look. Although the AUI system itself is responsible for figuring out what that means in terms of color, positioning, screen size, those kind of things. Those things can and will change from releases of Atlassian app to Atlassian app. You shouldn't have to worry about that. You want to have an interface that looks good and that conforms to the rest of the application that is hosting your interface. Once that is done, you don't need to worry about anything else. AUI enables that for you. So, again, I've done a lot of Java. I have not done a lot of JavaScript. I have not done a lot of web development. But it's important that we start at the beginning here to figure out what's going on. And I think that most of you have not really used AUI either, so it'll be good for the both of us. First of all, some news about the AUI team. There is an AUI team now. Ben Buchanan was recently picked as the team lead of the AUI team in Sydney. They have a full-time schedule. They have 4 people. Well, I couldn't find a good picture of Craig Sharkey. So here's a picture of Craig as I imagine him. I mean, it kind of looks like Craig if you never seen him before. This is the full-time AUI team. They have a project plan. They have a Jira tracker, which you should be able to see. And you can't, because it's thinking. Here we go. They have a full-time Jira issue tracker where things get done. They have actual support queues now. They support their applications. When issues come in that are filed by plugin developers or by people working on the products, they get introduced to this issue and they get scheduled and fixed. Previously, AUI was a part-time thing. People would go in and fix things when they needed to, which let the product ship, but which didn't do anything for consistency and didn't do anything for the usefulness of the product to outside plugin developers. That's no longer the case. We have a team. Also, this team has its own plan, its own schedule. They know what AUI 3.5, which was just released, was going to contain before they did it. They know what AUI 4, the next major release, is going to contain. And they work with the product teams to ensure that the right things come to the right product and that no one is left wanting for anything, and that everybody has consistent access to the same thing. What else is new in AUI? Well, there's this cool sandbox. Not that sandbox. That sandbox. What you're looking at is a special HTML page that lives on one of our doc sites, and it gives you 3 different panels, one in HTML, one in CSS, and one in JavaScript. This is basically an AUI development environment in the browser. You can put any HTML you like, any JavaScript you like, any CSS you like, and you can render that inside the page in the bottom pane here. What you're seeing here are AUI tabs that are being rendered by the HTML and the JavaScript up on top and down the bottom. This is a great way for you to experiment with AUI. and this should be the beginning and the end point of any of your exploration of AUI. Go here, play with it, see what's possible, see what you can do. In fact, I used this sandbox to create the screenshots you're going to see in this presentation. At the end of the presentation, I'll have a link which will point to every bit of documentation you will require in order to use AUI productively and effectively. So, last bit of news for AUI. As I said, AUI 3.5 is out. AUI 3.5 was recently put inside a Confluent, sorry, let me back up. AUI 3.5, and the version number confuses me too, will be the version of AUI that goes into Jira 5. Confluence 4 is shipping with a very similar version of AUI, and Confluence 4.1 is going to ship with the next version of AUI, which is 4.0. Confused yet? Yeah, we could do something about that. In any case, AUI 4 is coming. AUI 4 is a lot of cool stuff. We're going to have new versions of the dialog and drop-down components. We're going to change a lot of the way things work to make them more powerful. I've already had several people come to me today and say, can AUI do this? Can we do that? Is there a component for X? An answer to a surprisingly large number of those questions is yes. So AUI is useful today, it'll be more useful tomorrow. That's the good news. This is the bad news. That's the bad news. That's great. We kind of have to break compatibility for a lot of things in AUI. The source of binary is going to break. Sorry about that. The only explanation I can give you is that there comes a point in a software project's lifetime where you realize the API you have is not good enough for future work. So you have two choices. You can break it now and get the pain over with immediately and move on to do bigger and better things, or you can put it off, try to maintain two versions of the same API for what seems like forever. Eventually your new API stagnates for lack of use, and eventually you wind up spending twice as much effort for half as much gain. So this is a case of software where it goes back to that plan the AUI team has now. We need to break it now or it's not going to get done. So in any case, the AUI documentation space on our fancy new dev portal, developer.atlassian.com, which all of you should be at right now if you're not already, contains all the information that AUI will ever have documentation-wise. It is regularly updated by both Ben and his team. You need to go there and watch that space if you're doing anything related to AUI development. Release notes, plugin upgrades, all that good stuff. And I should mention, just because AUI 4.0 is not having a compatibility breaking change, it doesn't mean that all your old code is going to suddenly break overnight. There's going to be a deprecation plan, there's going to be a transfer plan, and all these other good things. However, don't wait too long. Aside from the components being more powerful, you're also going to want to use the new stuff and get rid of the old stuff quickly, because that day when the deprecation becomes removal, it sneaks up on you. Okay, so the future can be scary, especially when the future is now, because I'm scared. AUI has a lot of components and a lot of things to go through. AUI has 3 major classes of components, and we're going to have a chance to look through those. So let's see what we're doing here. The first class of AUI components is what are called general components. They are rock solid. These things are guaranteed to work. All browsers, all platforms, anywhere AUI lives, these are going to work. A general component is supported, which means you can file bugs against AUI or against the product to get people to help you with it. If it doesn't work the way you think it should, you can have that, you can send a question to someone, you can talk on answers, and the thing is, someone on the AUI team will work with you to get it where you want it. Let's see. Bug fixes for these kind of things are high priority. A general component is something that has to work. If it doesn't work, it's going to hurt all of us, because AUI is now in all the products. A bug fix for a general component is high priority and will be scheduled ahead of most other work inside an AUI feature iteration. I have this directly from Ben Davidson. So let's have an example of such a general purpose, powerful AUI component. How about tables? Everybody likes tables, right? Well, at least they're simple to see. What you're seeing here is a simple, well-defined HTML4 table. There's a table head section, there's a table body section. There's nothing at all unusual about what you're seeing here except for this little piece of glitter here. All that we have done here is add a class, AUI, to this table. Not even 10 characters of change. And that is enough to do this for us. What you're seeing now is that exact same table, marked up, attractive, easy to view, and that corresponds exactly to every other table inside the application. This was pretty dirt simple for just adding one class. This is an example of the power that AUI can bring to you. Here's another option. Forms. Everybody has forms Everybody needs user input. Everybody does this all the time, and we usually wind up hacking through it because it's usually the least interesting part of our application. AUI can help us here as well. Here is a standard HTML4 form. The cool thing about this form that I want you guys to notice is that it's well formed. And what I mean by that is we have labels, we have div sections that correlate related inputs and related labels. This makes it not only easy to read the HTML as a designer to say, what is this field for, but it gives the browser a lot of help in marking it up, and it gives AUI the direction it needs to mark it up into an attractive form. The only things that are different here are, again, this bit of magic glitter, the AUI classes and a few description classes here like field group, buttons container, and button submit. This information is all that AUI needs to render into this form. Again, pretty cool for not much effort, right? You have a form that is attractive, it matches everything else in the application, it's correct HTML, and it took very little effort to do. That sounds like a good idea to me. Also, let's talk about dialogues. Dialogues are how you get input from the user. A dialog often contains a form. How does a dialog look? What you see here is some JavaScript for building an AUI dialog. The options here, I think, should be pretty obvious. You're passing a JavaScript object to the constructor that says, I want the dialog to be this wide, this high, and it should do these things. It should have these behaviors. A dialog has a header, it has panels, it has buttons, and it has cancel functions. When rendered, it first looks like this. Here's the dialog that was rendered from the code I just showed you. Each piece of this dialog corresponds to what was programmatically constructed a minute ago. Up here, you see the header. The dialog add header method, the value of that corresponds to what you see up here. Then, the panels. Each panel contains its own set of fully formed HTML that can contain anything, any HTML you want, images, forms, what have you. It's pretty powerful. Finally, these buttons down here are bound to individual functions. The dialog can take a JavaScript function for a button that says, hey, not only can I go this place when I click the button, I can do something else. A button can be used to hide a dialog, it can be used to advance, forward, or backward, or pull up another page entirely, or even refresh the current HTML inside the current pane. At the click of a button, you may change the entire content of your dialog if that's the experience you want to have. It's also cool, I think, that you should notice that there are different functions for adding a button and adding a cancel functionality. Sometimes Atlassian likes to design a user interface such that a cancel link is obviously supposed to be different from a button, because how a user thinks about how a button operates is how different from a link should operate. A link usually takes you somewhere, a button usually does something. In this case, the cancel link just closes the page, but doing it this way through AUI and using the add cancel method makes it clear to the user that when you cancel this, nothing's going to happen. No form is going to be submitted, no action is going to be taken, the link is clicked, and it's gone. Pretty simple. Speaking of simple, there's a way to get messages to the users. I'm sure you guys have seen this stuff already as you've been using recent versions of Jira and Confluence. Here is some more JavaScript. What you see here is JavaScript for presenting a message to the user. There are several different kinds of messages: info, warning, error, what have you. These basically just take their content and show it to the user in an attractive fashion. And here's how that works. These are good for providing input from returns of forms. They're good for explaining the consequences of an action. They're also good for things like field errors inside a form, where the user might have to enter, say, a bunch of numbers, and they type in a bunch of letters. A message like this is a good way of letting them know, no, you shouldn't have done that. Second kind of AUI component we're going to talk about is a prototype. A prototype component fills a specific need. It has slower bug fixes. It has a faster deprecation cycle. What this means is a prototype is still being hacked on. It may not work 100% correctly. It may not work in all products, but it's an idea that the team has committed to exploring to basically its full extent. This doesn't mean that it won't go away tomorrow. This doesn't mean that it's not going to stop working tomorrow, or that the API is going to be stable, but it's something that it's going to explore and work with and change. So, here's an example of an unstable component. This snippet of code has caused more pain and headache for everybody in this room and developers around the world than anything else since buffer overruns. This is terrible code. This should raise the hair on the back of your neck. You should never, ever look at this and not feel sick to the very pit of your being. If I sound passionate, it's because I've had to debug this kind of stuff before and it's made me cry. This is very bad. Why is this bad? For those of you who don't know why this is bad, you're taking input that you don't trust, which could have come from anywhere, possibly a malicious user or a script. It's being put into here, it's going to go into an HTML link you're going to send back to the page. This is wide open vulnerability for cross-site scripting. So, here's a better way. A prototype AUI component, just called escape HTML, will basically just take anything that goes into your form here. You can pass it a block of arbitrary HTML or text and say, I don't trust what's in here. Make sure there's nothing bad in here. What will happen is that it will go through, it will escape all the evil characters for you. What comes out is going to be a lot better and safer, not only for you, but also for your users. This is a good thing. It's actually pretty tricky to write a method like this, which is why it's still in prototype phase, but this system has a good chance of making it the general one day. And even if you're not going to use it yourself, I highly recommend you check out the source for how this is done, because it's actually very helpful. It's something that we should all know very, very well. Here's a second option. This code should be very familiar to those of you who have written Java plugins and are trying to get internationalization strings from the plugin to your users. Well, in the past, it's been kind of hard to do this. We've had to rely on hacks like putting the internationalization strings in hidden form fields on the page, so you have a velocity template that imports the web resource manager, that reads the property file, that spits out the string into the page where it gets rendered as HTML, then there's some JavaScript to sniff the page, find the text, and then do the substitution. It's kind of a pain. It's one of the reasons that people don't really do internationalization unless they really have to. Well, we do have a little bit of help here. Charles had mentioned earlier about the closure templates and how Confluence uses a web resource transformer to turn the closure templates into JavaScript and insert them into your page. Something very similar is happening here. What we have is an internationalization component in AUI that can read a text string. You write the JavaScript for reading a text string. As it gets deployed to the running application, it will go through a transformer that will interpret this JavaScript call and transform it into the internationalization for you. This skips a legion of hacks. This makes things a lot easier to get information, internationalized information from your page into your JavaScript. It's quite powerful. I personally don't know if it's going to make it in general, but it's something that's cool enough and useful enough that I hope it does. So there's an example of a prototype component. Useful, but probably not ready for full-time use. Now there is the experimental components. And experimental is a word that has a few connotations. I don't mean this kind of experimental. I mean this kind of experimental. It's basically the kind of code you write because you want to know if something is possible. Sometimes it is possible and you still don't want it. All right? A prototype component is basically completely unsupported. If you file a bug for an experimental component, if you file a bug for an experimental component, it's going to be ignored. Experimental components change all the time, day to day, sometimes hour to hour. There's no guarantee they're going to make it into the product. There's no guarantee they're going to make it into any future version of AUI. There's no guarantee they won't disappear from your code tomorrow. Don't use them. Look at them, learn from them, but don't use them. Whoops. There. Sharif mentioned a minute ago about page layouts being a new feature in Confluence 4.1. This is what he's talking about. Page layouts are driven by something new, an experimental component in AUI 4, called a page layout. This page itself should look pretty familiar to most of us. This is the standard layout that Atlassian uses both for Jira and Confluence and a bunch of other pages. There's nothing too fancy about it. However, what is fancy about it is something like this. The page you see in current versions of stuff is built by site mesh hacks and decorators and velocity layers and templates and a bunch of other things. It's generally a pain to figure out how it works and what to do with it. Starting in AUI 4, we're going to have a better way. What you're seeing are HTML5 tags. Body is an HTML tag that we know, of course. Section is an HTML5 tag, but header and div are tags, in this case, that we can redefine to meet what we want. HTML5 allows browsers to interpret tags in such a way as to give them constant styling and to ascribe basically markup behavior to syntax, thus bringing presentation and content closer together. The AUI page layout stuff takes full advantage of this. What's going to happen is that you'll have classes and headers and a set of HTML elements that will allow you to describe a page in an Atlassian application that looks exactly the same as everything else, that fits in without having to know any magic decorators, without having to worry about anything else. It's just going to look right. This is extremely powerful stuff. It's experimental because it's very hard to figure out. And it's the kind of thing that if we get it working in one product, we really, really, really want to get it to work in all the products. So that's what this is about. And it's going to be very, very cool. And I hope we find a way to get it done. So, now we've seen some examples of AUI components, just a quick demo gallery, nothing too fancy. Thanks, by the way, to Zach, who basically did the same talk last year. I managed to harvest a lot of examples for this. So, thanks, Zach. Now, let's look at some real-world plugins that use AUI. So, 3 plugins, 3 teams, 3 very different use cases. Let's start with this one. This is the Scroll Wiki PDF Exporter plugin. This is on Pack. It's pretty popular. It has several thousand downloads. It's something that a lot of people have used, a lot of people actually pay for. So what's going on here? The plugin allows you to define PDF-style sheets. When you export pages from Confluence, the page can go through a PDF export of your choosing, not just a default Atlassian-style sheet, but can go through your own PDF-style sheet and come out looking however you want. This is pretty cool if you want to export your documentation and have your company's logo on the top, or confidential, or URIs only, or secret, or something like that. And we've had people want to do that before. This plugin is pretty cool for doing that. What you don't notice about this is that the way it's laid out after their change here is that there's a lot of information in this form because PDF style sheets are a pretty hairy, powerful, complicated thing. And they've used AUI here to very much simplify it for them. Here's a dialog from their configuration. You'll notice this is just one big AUI dialog. Down at the bottom here, this is the same buttons container that I showed you with the cancel link and the save button. Up here on the left are the panels. Each panel, when you click on it, will fill the right side of the dialog with different information. Also up here, there's some form decoration. As we were able to style forms consistently with fields and drop-downs and all that other kind of thing, the same thing is being done here. The forms are being decorated consistently with other applications. They recently wrote their entire stuff to take advantage of AUI, and I have to admit this is one of the more impressive uses I've seen of simplifying complexity for the user's benefit. Here's another plugin, Atlassian Support Tools. This is made by a team at Atlassian that is not a product team. These people don't work on the products day to day. They're support engineers and other engineers taking 20% time. The idea behind this plugin is that it collects information from the running instance. When it comes time to file a support ticket, you can file a support ticket from inside the plugin. It will collect all the information that you require and send it off to support, thus saving that whole step of what log files do I have, what do you need, and the complicated interchange that follows that. We can skip all of that with this information, with this plugin. Again, they present tons of info. So here's how they simplified the reams of information they can collect from the user and how they can do it. Using vertical tabs. Now, I know some of you may not be familiar with the vertical tab paradigm, but you're all familiar with the horizontal one, where you click on the top of the dialog and the content below refreshes depending on which part of the dialog you pick. This is the same thing, so it's just being done vertically. Also, more form decoration, except there's a little twist here. It might be kind of hard to see on the screen here, but these fields have red stars just to the left of them. This is a standard AUI indication that the form requires this data in order to be submitted successfully. Without this information, the form isn't going to work. The proper time to tell the user that information is required is before they submit the form, not after. If you submit with this design, they can submit the information. If they miss something, you can then pop out one of those AUI messages I showed you earlier and say, oh, you forgot to include this information. The user can slap himself on the head, fill in the information, and happily proceed from there. Speaking of messages, up here at the top, and again it's kind of hard to see, that's actually a yellow background with an AUI, with a standard AUI warning message. It doesn't include the icon because that's an option you have with AUI, it's not to have the icon. So what you're seeing here is just a way of using an AUI message to convey information to the user without being intrusive and while still fitting into the rest of the application. Here is a third plugin. It's Tempo. Tempo is time tracking for Jira. It's a very simple concept, but it's incredibly hard to do. Not unlike Greenhopper, the Tempo guys have had to include an entire UI within the product. Jira's user interface is good for issues and project tracking, but it's not very good for filing timesheets. So the Tempo developers have solved this problem by creating an entire UI inside the product. Greenhopper had the same problem because Jared did not have an agile design UI inside it. So they created one in Greenhopper. So similar problems, but very complicated UI here. Here's how AUI can help them. Here are 2 pages in Tempo that relate to filling in a timesheet, especially what period does this time apply to. Okay, for the month of March 2011, how much work did I do? Both of these drop-downs are actually the same code, just different values. These are AUI drop-downs. A drop-down is a different component of AUI that, as you might imagine, allows you to click on something and then have a list of options flow below it. It's kind of like an automatically hidden multi-select list. So it's not a big deal. Well, it is a big deal for them. Save them a lot of code. So, last part is how to use AUI to take an existing plugin that you've already written and decorate the hell out of it to make it look gorgeous. This is something that we don't do enough. Our plugins are not gorgeous enough. That's going to change with AUI. So, where do we start? Well, here's a plugin. This plugin is the copy space plugin. It's something that Atlassian uses internally and supports internally, although it's unsupported for public use because it's very dangerous stuff to copy entire space inside Confluence. What's going on here is that you give the user a list of options, text fields, checkboxes, submit, etc., and say, here, take this space, go copy it, and put me on the new space. It's a pretty simple piece of functionality. It's something that Confluence does require. Here's a screenshot of it, and you can tell just by looking at it that it's a little off. It doesn't fit in with the rest of the application, and there's a reason for that. Here's the code that drives that form. I don't know how many of you have done front-end design here, but there are a multitude of sins embedded in this one slide. First of all, and to be fair, he couldn't really help this, is that there are magic CSS classes like step title, step desk, input section. I don't know what these are. I work at Atlassian, and I could not figure out what these are. The only way I could figure out what they were, if I really wanted to, was to start digging through a bunch of CSS files inside Confluence. I had no desire to do that. I don't know why plugin developers would either. This is kind of bad. Also, there's this one. Zach has gotten on my case before about this when I did this, just through a combination of lack of time and knowledge of what I was doing. Using tables for layout is very, very bad. It's not what they're for. They look like crap and they're not done absolutely right, and they're a very fiddly way to do what should be a very simple problem. So this isn't very good either. Then there's this. Another one of those things where you don't really have a lot of choice, especially if you're working in early versions of Confluence. But delegating your HTML construction to macros is exactly the inverse of what you should be doing. Data should be coming from your servlet or your web work action, being processed and then displayed to the user. What you're doing is going back to the rendering layer to get HTML out when HTML should be the final output of your process. Basically, you're going back and forth to get the model and the view mixed up. That's bad design. We shouldn't have to do that, and we don't have to do that anymore. Here's a comparison of the existing copy space form that I just showed you with another form with the same menu here. So an edit space basically says change the name of the space, description, that kind of thing. The copy space, which is the form I just showed you, things are inconsistent. They don't look the same. The buttons are different. The cancel link is a cancel button. The styling is wrong. The options are spaced closer together here, but they're not spaced close together at the bottom. If they're left aligned, they should be right aligned, that kind of thing. There's a lot of inconsistency here. So, how do we start fixing it? Let's declare an AUI form. This is the exact same code that we saw a second ago, although we're going to start a little bit smaller, and we're going to start with just a little bit of magic glitter. Again, like earlier where you saw applying the AUI class to tables, this is the same thing. We're supplying it to a form. Also, note that we are creating well-formed HTML here. We are putting a header tag inside the form to title the form. We are putting a description div inside for the form to say what it's about and how it's going to work. Very little HTML, but it's correctly styled, and what you get is this. Now, I know some of you may think at this point, that doesn't look like much. It's not very impressive. Well, on the face, it's not very impressive for what it does. But think about what we didn't have to do here. We didn't have to align any elements. We didn't have to pick colors or fonts. We didn't have to match code with anything else in the application. We just wrote valid HTML and put AUI glitter on it. It sparkles beautifully now. for very little work. This is good. This is something we want to keep going. Let's talk about the text fields in that same form. Here, again, we have constructed well-formed standard HTML. Field sets in HTML group related values. In this case, they group the text fields. A text field has a description for the input, how long it is, its size, and has a label saying what that field is for. Again, well-formed HTML, field sets, and labels. Also, this little bit of magic here marks this field as required input. Again, a little red star I was talking about earlier, this is where that red star comes from. And by the way, the red star is our pick for UI design. If that changes to a blue triangle in Jira 6, that's fine. You write this code, it'll become blue triangle in Jira 6, and you don't have to change anything. This code is forward compatible, and I cannot emphasize that point enough. These classes that you use in AUI describe what the elements do, not what they should look like. This is not the case where you say, I want a button here and it should be this size. You tell AUI, I want a button here, I want a field here, mark it up the way it should look, and it will be done. When this is rendered, you get this. Note again, we have the red star here marking required data. We have fields aligned properly. The colons and the size of the field come together correctly, and it looks good. Again, think of what did not have to be done here. This alignment did not have to be done manually. There was no table layout involved. We'd have to come up with CSS rules to say these things should line up or be correct. The program knows what should be done. Next thing is the checkboxes. Again, what you're looking at here is well-formed HTML. Again, we have a field set grouping related options. We have a legend element to say what to indicate to the browser what these related field set elements are for. In this case, we're just using a simple span to say it's an option if I'm highlighting here so you can see it better. But again, these are just checkboxes. I have not changed one functional part of this form. This form is still a post request to the same URL that carries the same variables and the same form names. The GET request works now just as well as it did before. All these changes are purely cosmetic and not very big in scope. But for such a small investment, I get a big win. Again, these classes are how it should look. Sorry, these classes are what they are for, not how it should look. And with that small amount of effort, we get this form. Again, alignment is correct, styling is correct. Think of all the things we didn't have to do to get this right. Now, the last trick, buttons. Again, you may recognize these button containers, part of well-formed HTML. The way that AUI lays this out is a buttons container assigns specific information to every button or link or anything inside it. They get aligned, they get spaced out properly depending on what they are. A save link, a cancel link, etc. Consistent styling for these button classes. And when it comes out, you have the save button and the cancel link, meaning if I click on this cancel link, the form disappears, there's no confusion of what input comes through or anything like that. So, that was a lot of stuff. A lot of information to cover, a lot of things to worry about. I want you to understand that AUI is a powerful framework. I've tried to give you an overview of what you can do with it here. I tried to show you what is possible, but this is not by any means the be-all, end-all. The information you need lives on the documentation, and that's where it needs to stay. So, if you take away nothing else from this presentation, understand, AUI makes it easy to build great-looking, consistent, functional user interfaces. That's what AUI is about. That's what all of our plugins should be about as well. I mentioned a link you need to understand. Well, there's actually 2 links. Here they are. These links will take you to the AUI documentation on developer.atlassian.com and other places. Write these links down, those little pads in front of you. That's what those pens and pencils are for. Put this information down and browse that after I get done talking here. If you have questions, please come to me. Ask me, I'll answer what I can. I'm not on the AUI team, but I'll do the best I can for you. And that's all I think all I have for you to talk. Thank you guys. We have a couple minutes for questions if there are any.
So you showed building those components programmatically as well, not from all of these client side JavaScript. You have a similar thing on the server side, to build as a component.
The question is, in the case of the dialog component, I showed building it on the client through JavaScript. The question is about, can I build on the server as a component? Like, what would you use it for? How would you want that to work?
So instead of going ahead and going to the server side and saying, okay, use these pieces and put it into a template and build up this HTML, do that same form example on the plugin, you're writing plugin, so I want to create this form object, I want to add a title to it and these types of inputs, etc. Now, UI, you bring it.
Mhm.
So you do that on the server side, right? That point handoff for UI to do it.
Not with AUI, and generally we don't prefer to do it that way. And the reason is because we think that how the UI is marked up and appears is a function of the client. It's more of a style decision for us. There are people that do that. There are some frameworks that do that. That's the way that we've chosen to do it. So it could be done, but not with AUI. I mean, the form I showed you with the copy space plugin was an example of doing that kind of rendering on the server. And the problem with that is it's kind of fragile and it doesn't translate well to what the user does. And in general, it's easier to write JavaScript styles than it is to hack velocity macros.
Oh, no. I mean, sorry, the data
Right.
pieces where you got the name of the form, etc., kind of checkbox,
Right.
and like you did that in JavaScript, right? You have the
Yes.
component version.
Yes.
And then when they render it back.
Right.
So I'm saying on the server side, where you know that we have these component data elements that we pull in, put that in an object, and that object, serialize it, clear it over on that client side, so now do we need
Maybe I'm not understanding, but does the all is solved. What's up?
Do you have any solution, technical or maybe an invention for CSS namespaces so that plugin developers writing their own CSS don't clash with AUI or each other?
The question was, do we have any kind of CSS namespacing system such that plugin CSS styles don't clash with Atlassian ones? Not to my knowledge. That's a good idea. We namespace our JS pretty carefully. That AJS namespace for JavaScript stuff is for that reason. But as far as CSS goes, I've run into this problem myself in recent plugin development. And I basically wind up appending a little text string in front of all my styles so I know they stand out for the rest of the page. If you want to be really rigorous, you could take like the plugin key and put that in front of your CSS or something like that. I mean, it looks ugly as hell. It would be a great way to guarantee there'd be no conflict. But I'll pass it along to the AUI team. That's probably a good idea. More question?
So there's AUI templates at the moment do like client stuff, like JavaScript templates.
Right.
Are those kind of effectively, well, there's that and there's sort of closure templating and there's other bits and pieces for other different apps like which that's and things that are plans to standardise on closure template or is AUI templates dead? Will that be forward compatible?
There has been no decision on standardization as far as the closure template work, partly because it's so closely tied to the JSON RPC stuff, which is also in itself a piece of technology, and it's kind of a big gulp to swallow for everybody at once. As far as AUI templates, I know from talking to the team that they're not 100% satisfied with the way templates have turned out or are being used. But as for now, they're still a general availability component, and that they're not planning to be deprecated anytime in the near future, although that may change. So I'm not sure if that completely answers your question, but that's the best thing. Roberto, we can do that.
Certification. Okay, I will give you more details, but to make sure that we get to know what's going on. And I'm just totally jumping to the AUI, and you guys are going to do stuff. Give us a lot of topics, at least 1 or 2 releases in advance.
Yeah, I'll say it again just to be clear. Watch the AUI space on developer@Atlassian.com. Now we have a project plan. We also have a deprecation schedule for components. There's a list of steps they go through in order deprecation. So the first step is like put a warning on the page that this is going to go away. Then we put warnings in the code. Then it gets taken out. Then it gets turned into a legacy product. You have to manually include in your plugin. Then it just goes away entirely. So there'll be a stage of deprecation for each component in AUI. If we decide to retire a component, it will go away in orderly fashion over time and give everybody a chance to get their stuff updated before they're completely broken. So. I think that's all the time we got. If you have questions, again, find me, I'll do the best I can. And thank you guys for being so patient.